Here's the gap that this video closes. A buyer can be completely convinced you can solve their problem and still not buy, simply because you never gave them a clear path to decide. Conviction without a path to act goes nowhere. This level is the path. This is the other half of long form, the conversion half. The video sales letter, the sales pages, whose entire job is to turn a convinced buyer into a customer. In the content flywheel engine, it's run by the system called conversion flow. This is part 6 of the level mini-series. Before you watch it, make sure you have seen part 5, authority and education long form, because this level acts on the conviction that level built. If you run a business, if you're a founder, or if you sell professional services, this is the level where all the trust you built finally turns into a decision. I spent over 27 years in B2B marketing, and I've watched businesses build genuine conviction in their buyers and then lose the sale anyways, because they never gave that conviction a clear place to go. In this video, I will show you what conversion long form is and how it differs from educational long form. I will show you how conversion flow gives a warm buyer a clear path to a decision, the outcome it produces, and how the outcome feeds the final level, scale, which is part 7. This is one piece of a bigger framework I call the conversion ecosystem. And my goal is to use this system to help you become the most visible, the most valuable, and the most trusted business in your market. So if that interests you, keep on watching. There are 2 kinds of long form content, and they do the opposite jobs. It's easier to lump them together and miss the distinction this whole video rests on. Let me start by making that distinction clear. There's educational long form, which we covered in part 5, whose job is to build conviction through depth. And there's conversion long form. At this level, the job is to turn that conviction into a decision. Both are long, but they're not the same. Educational long form is run by the content continuum. It teaches, it proves, and it demonstrates. It answers the buyer's hard questions and builds the deep belief that you could solve their problem. A case study, a podcast, a thorough educational video, these build conviction but don't ask for the decision. And that's on purpose. Their job is belief, not action. Conversion long form, on the other hand, does the opposite. It assumes that conviction is already there, and its entire job is to give that conviction a clear path to become a decision. A video sales letter, a sales landing page, these are still long-form content, substantial in detail, but every element on them is built to move a convicted buyer to act, not to teach them something new. The educational piece builds on belief, the conversion piece acts on it. This is why there are 2 separate levels, even though both are long form. If you blur them together, you get educational content that never asks for the sale, or you get sales content that tries to convince a buyer who was never educated. Keeping them distinct lets each do their job well. The educational piece builds conviction without the pressure of a pitch, and the conversion piece drives the decision because the conviction is already in place. So this level, conversion long form, is the action layer of the engine. In the content flywheel engine, it's run by conversion flow. And conversion flow is the action layer, where a warmed and trusting buyer is given a clear path to a decision. Its job is not to build trust. The level before that did that. Its job is to take a buyer who already trusts you and give them a clear, compelling way to say yes. A fully convinced buyer can still walk away and never buy. Conviction is necessary for a decision, but it's not enough on its own because belief and action are 2 different things. This is exactly why I make a distinction between a convinced buyer and what I call a dedicated buyer. A dedicated buyer has already done most of the work of choosing you already. The only job left is removing whatever friction stands between that decision and the actual yes. Understanding why is the key to this level. Let me explain, because it might seem like a convinced buyer would buy on their own, but they often don't. Think about what stops a convinced buyer from acting. They believe in you, but they're busy, and acting takes effort. They're not sure exactly what the next step is. They have a lingering question or a small hesitation that no one has answered. They meant to decide and then life got in their way. None of these is a failure of conviction. They are failures of the path, the absence of a clear, easy, compelling route from belief to decision. This is the gap conversion long form closes. A convinced buyer with no clear path drifts because nothing turned their belief into a specific action at that specific moment. A convinced buyer with a clear path acts because the route from where they are to a decision is laid out in front of them, easy to follow, with their last hesitations handled. The conviction was there all along. Their path is what let it become a decision. Closing that drift for good is exactly what the conversion ecosystem is built to do. This is exactly why the earlier friction principle matters here at the conversion moment. What I call a friction audit tests every touch point against two jobs, reducing friction for the right buyer and filtering out the wrong one. And the conversion moment is where that audit matters most. By the time a buyer reaches your conversion asset, they've decided in principle. The only thing that could lose them now is friction in the doing, a confusing page, an unclear next step, or an unanswered last question. Conversion longform exists to remove that friction, making the doing as easy as deciding already was. So the buyer's conviction flows smoothly onto action. So the reason why this level exists is that conviction alone does not convert. A believing buyer still needs a clear, low-friction path to act. And providing that path is the whole job of the conversion longform. Without it, you build all this belief and then watch it stall at the last step because you gave the buyer no clear path. With it, the conviction you work so hard to build finally becomes a decision. So how does conversion longform actually give a buyer a clear path? Through content built specifically for the decision. Most commonly, video sales letters and sales landing pages. Let me show you what makes these different from every other kind of content because the difference is entirely in their focus. A video sales letter or VSL is a long-form video whose single purpose is to walk a convinced buyer to a decision. It restates the problem the buyer already feels and confirms a solution that they're already leaning towards. It handles their last remaining objections and makes the path to acting clear and compelling. It's long because the real decision deserves substance, but every minute is pointing at one thing, helping the buyer decide right now. A sales landing page does the same job, but in a different format. It's a focus page built entirely around the decision with no distractions, no competing links, and no wandering. It presents the offer clearly, addresses the buyer's hesitation, and provides the proof that reassures them, giving them one obvious next step. Where a normal web page invites browsing, a sales landing page invites deciding, because it's stripped down to a single path that matters. Notice what both have in common. Singular focus on one decision, everything extra is removed. There is one path laid out clearly, with the buyer's objections handled along the way, and one obvious action at the end. This singular focus is what makes conversion long-form work. It doesn't try to also educate or build authority or also entertain. It does one thing, guide a convinced buyer to a decision, and it does that one thing without distraction. And because the buyer arrives already convinced, this content doesn't have to do the heavy lifting of building trust. The levels before it did that. Conversion flow gives a warmed and trusting buyer a clear path to a decision, which means it's working with belief that's already there. Its job is focus and clarity at the moment of decision, taking a buyer who already trusts you and removing every obstacle between their conviction and their yes. The outcome of conversion longform is a customer. It is the one outcome the whole engine has been building towards. Conversion flow turns that warmed buyer into a customer. Everything before this, the attention, the capture, the nurture, the authority, was carrying the buyer towards this one moment. This level is where trust finally becomes a transaction. This is the outcome the entire front of the engine exists to produce. All the attention created, all the context captured, all the trust nurtured, and the conviction built converges here at the moment a convinced buyer is given a clear path it takes. The customer is the payoff for every level before, and conversion longform is where that payoff is collected. When this level works, the trust the engine built turns into revenue. But notice that the outcome is not just a transaction. It's a new customer, and that new customer is worth more to the engine than the sale alone because of what that customer can become. A successful customer is the raw material for new proof, a result you could point to, a story you could tell, evidence that you could deliver. This is what I call a proof win, an early visible result delivered before doubt ever has a chance to set in. The customer is both the payoff of this level and the seed of new authority content, which is a connection worth holding on to. So the outcome has an immediate part and a forward part. The immediate part is the customer and the revenue, the direct result of turning conviction into a decision. The forward part is that this customer, if their outcome is good, becomes proof, material that can be turned into authority content that convinces the next buyer. The outcome of conversion feeds back into the engine as new evidence, which is part of what makes the flywheel a flywheel. So the outcome to aim for is not just a sale. It's a successful customer whose good outcome you could capture and reuse. A convinced buyer is given a clear path who becomes a customer whose result becomes proof. Produce that and you've done the job at this level. You've turned all that built up trust of the engine into an actual customer and set up the next round of authority content in the process. Scale can only amplify what already works. Pour volume into a conversion path that does not reliably convert and you just burn through money faster. This is exactly why scale comes last. Let me show you how this level feeds the final one, because the relationship between them is the key to scaling safely. The connection is this. The final level, scale, is about amplifying what works, pushing more volume through the engine using paid advertising and other amplification methods. But scale can only amplify if something already works. It needs a proven conversion path to pour volume into, because amplifying a broken conversion just wastes money faster. Conversion long form is what produces that proven path. A VSL or a sales page that reliably converts warm buyers into customers. So this level feeds scale by providing the conversion first. Once you have a conversion asset that dependently turns convinced buyers into customers, you have something worth amplifying. You know that if you send more warm buyers to this path, more of them will convert because the path is proven. That reliability is exactly what scale needs before it turns into volume. And it's why the conversion layer has to be working before the scale layer is switched on. This is why the sequence runs conversion before scale, and why scale is the last of it all. Turn on scale before a conversion path is proven, and you pour expensive volume into something that does not reliably convert, which burns money and produces little. Prove the conversion path first, and scale becomes a multiplier on a machine that works, turning a proven conversion into predictable growth. The order protects you from scaling a leak. So the handoff is this. Conversion long form produces a proven path that reliably turns trust into customers and hands that proven path to scale, whose job is to amplify it. Conversion proves that the trust converts. Scale multiplies how many people travel that proven path, which brings us to the final video in this series, the level that takes everything you have built and makes it bigger. Here are the things you need to understand about conversion long form. There are two kinds of long form: education, which builds conviction, and conversion, which turns that conviction into a decision. This level is conversion long form, the video sales letter, and the sales landing pages. It runs on the content flywheel engine by conversion flow, the action layer that gives a warmed and trusting buyer a clear path to a decision. It exists because conviction alone does not convert. A convinced buyer still needs a clear, low-friction path to act, or their belief stalls. Conversion longform provides that path through content with singular focus on the decision. A VSL or a sales page that restates the problem, handles the last objections, and gives one obvious next step, removing every obstacle between conviction and yes. The outcome is a customer, and a successful customer becomes new proof for the authority layer, which is part of how the engine feeds itself. And the outcome feeds the final level scale by producing a proven path that reliably turns trust into a customer. Scale can only amplify what already works. So conversion has to be proven before scale is switched on. Conversion proves the path, scale multiplies who travels it. That is conversion long form, part 6 of the level miniseries, run by Conversion Flow in the Content Flywheel engine. This is one layer of something bigger I call the conversion ecosystem. If you haven't watched part 5, authority and educational longform, go back for it. Conversion longform works on a convinced buyer, and educational longform is what builds that conviction. Next up is part 7, the final video, scale, where we take the whole proven engine and amplify it, run by the scale system. Remember, the most visible, the most valuable, the most trusted business in your market wins. The whole point of the conversion ecosystem is to build a system that makes you all three.